This is Reese Brady, dictating field report number 21, the Pilgrim File. Per the firm's satellite access, location is next to this abandoned stretch of state highway. I notified my home office that local police never recovered the remains, so a field asset should be sent to locate them. No decision has been made, so I'm doing it. And it should be down this slope here. Whoa! Hey! Whoa!
My name is Manias Hebdeman. My family is originally from Turkey. I was born just outside of Istanbul. The 1940s was a time of political upheaval in my parents' home country. They caught a boat to America shortly after my 4th birthday. My parents have always loved the United States. My father calls it the restless marvel. I also love this place. I love the freedom. You're free to do anything you want here. Or if you're like me, you're free to do nothing. I finished American high school, but did not continue my education past that. I never settled down like both my brothers did. I have no wife, no children, and no family other than what I was born with. I do not own a business or a store. I can't even say that I have much of a career. What I am is a movie projector repair technician. I am licensed in most of the states up and down America's eastern seaboard and belong to my local IATSE union. I spend most of my time in a stuffy, overheated bio box, tinkering with the projectors and all the related machinery you will find in those tiny little rooms at the back of every movie house. The work is far from being tedious because I get to hop into my old Pinto and travel wherever there's work to be done. One day I may be in a big fancy theater in downtown Baltimore adjusting the sprockets and rollers on their mammoth Century JJ. 2 nights later I can be way out in the middle of nowhere at some off-season summer camp fixing their worn-out old Elmo. I see a lot of places. I also watch many of the movies for free, which is nice. But the main benefit is that there's always somebody new in my life to talk to and to get to know. For employees, movie houses attract all kinds of strange birds. Most of the bosses and managers are capable and easygoing people who stumbled backwards into their jobs. There are always, of course, the myopic and vindictive manager types who somehow get hired to run these places. The worker bees are everything from high school kids to starving artists to borderline vagrants who are just working until they can get their car out of the shop so they can move on. The only skilled laborers are the projectionists, many of whom have been sweating away in a bio box since the days of nitrate film stock. One theater I've been contracted at is the Danville. It's a grand old place in an old railroad town in the middle of the mountains. The Danville was run by an officious little man named Bill Barvey. He was what a lot of my American friends call a big frog in a small pond. It was never pleasurable to do any work for him. But the rest of the crew at the Danville was all right. It was mostly goofy young high schoolers working for gas money. They were always fun to talk to and willing to spare a cigarette during breaks in the alley behind the theater. Then there was Carl Hammond, who was there working at the candy counter of the Danville last summer when I arrived to fix the carbon lamps on a pair of aging Simplexes. A great big bear of a man, Hammond seemed at first to be the type who was everyone's friend. Like me, he was able to get along with just about anyone, including the gaggle of teens who worked there part-time. He even seemed to get along with the peculiar and imperious Bill Barvey. Hammond and I hit it off right away. I had to spend a day of tinkering to get the Simplexes running, and then I had to stay in town for a second day, waiting for a tire to be replaced on my Pinto. So I had the chance to share some smoke breaks with Hammond, plus a few meals at a coffee shop around the corner from the Danville. Hammond was not a skilled laborer of any sort, as far as I could tell. He traveled about, working what amounted to handyman jobs. In fact, he was even more nomadic than I was. He had spent the previous summer washing dishes at a diner in Seattle. He had spent the past fall and Christmas doing maintenance at some old folks' home somewhere in Iowa. And now Hammond was running the candy and popcorn counter at the old Danville. Initially, I thought he was kind of like me, willing to work hard when it was necessary, but not too serious about anything in particular. Early in the fall, I got another call from the Danville. The Simplexes were acting up again, and the union had given them my number. I was surprised that the person calling me was a woman this time. Apparently, Bill Barvey wasn't in the picture anymore, and a lady named Kathy was the new boss at the Danville. I never really cared too much for Barvey, so I certainly didn't ask anything about where he'd gone. I agreed to come right down and attend to the projectors. I was glad to see Hammond was still working at the Danville. He had that same big smile he always did, and he gave me a wave. Then he went back to whatever he was doing at the time. Later, during my break, I came back down and found Hammond at the back of the theater. I told him steaks were on me at the local Sizzler if he was amenable to that, and we could catch up on things. He happily accepted my offer. After work, Hammond and I went out for the meal like we planned. He filled me in on the happenings of the Danville since last I'd been there. He mentioned how Bill Barvey had just stopped showing up one day, never even came back for his last paycheck. Then Hammond moved on to other subjects, like how the police had tried to bust the ticket girl for pot and how she had locked herself in the ladies' room and flushed her whole stash down the toilet before they could get to her. There we were again, two middle-aged bachelors, enjoying our steaks, coasting through life, and just kind of laughing about it. "Hey, I've got something to show you in my truck," Hammond said to me. Then he added, "If you're cool." If you are cool. I had learned by then, mostly from the youngsters I'd become acquainted with at the theaters I'd worked at, that usually was a reference to the assassin of youth, or the devil's harvest, or the gateway drug, or if you're a typical teenager, just plain old pot. I have also become acquainted with pot itself. I got chided into trying it one night around the back of a drive-in by a trio of college girls. I am sure the slightly stupefied expression on my face after the first few puffs greatly amused them. I said to Hammond, "Sure." I paid the tab, and we walked out to his truck. We got in and drove off. I figured as much. Pot is not something to be smoked in public these days, given the ferocity of the war on drugs. I thought to myself that Hammond probably wanted to find a quiet back road where we could safely light up. We drove out of town several miles. We had a good conversation going. The sun went down the rest of the way, and we turned onto a secondary road. We were trying to one-up each other with jokes and puns at that point in the conversation. Hammond could be genuinely funny when he wanted, I'll give him that. He had me in stitches over a cascade of jokes that were all at the expense of Canadian border guards and maple syrup. The truck turned down a gravel road, and that is when Hammond said to me, "Hey, I can do a magic trick." I was still wiping away tears from laughing so hard, so I just responded by saying, "Oh yeah?" "Yeah," Hammond said back. "Yeah." Then he said, "I can make that blazer you're wearing fly out of the passenger side window beside you." And I said, "Oh yeah?" And he said, "Yeah." Hammond reached back behind the seat and drew out a short-barreled rifle with a gray stock and some kind of scope mounted on it. Without taking his eyes off of the road, holding the rifle in just one hand, he jammed the end of its barrel up under my jaw. "Take the coat off and toss it out the window," he snarled. I made no reply. I just sat there dumbfounded, my head cocked at a funny angle from the pressure of the barrel. The wind blowing in through the open window was freezing on my scalp. Seconds ticked by. Hammond just kept driving, eyes on the road, one hand still holding the rifle. It was getting very dark outside. I had no idea where the road was headed. There were no other cars, and there was nothing around us but fields and trees. I slipped off the blazer and balled it up on my lap. Then I tossed it out the window. "Ta-da!" Hammond bellowed. The gun barrel came away from my jaw. Hammond set the rifle across his lap. He tipped his head back and laughed hysterically. I kept quiet. "Hey, man, come on," Hammond said to me after he finally stopped laughing. "Come on, it was just a damn joke. Jeez, you look like I pissed in your cereal." I said nothing. "Come on, man," Hammond pleaded. "Hey, no hard feelings, man. What, are you mad at me? You know what? Here." Hammond reached across the cab of the truck and placed the rifle across my lap, with the butt towards him and the barrel towards my door. "Go on then," Hammond said. "Look, if you're really mad at me, toss the gun out. Go ahead." I really did, in fact, seriously consider throwing the gun out of the window of the moving truck. But inexplicably, I found myself frozen, unable to take any action at all. The possibility of any motion or decision on my part loomed up large in my mind as a very real threat to my life. I did nothing. Hammond kept goading me. The more that he saw my terror was keeping me from moving a muscle, the more he kept at me, daring me to throw the rifle out of the window. He had a good laugh every time he paused, and I still sat there inactive. Finally, I managed to say in a mostly choked-up voice, "None of this is funny." "Funny," Hammond responded in a deeply mocking tone. "Funny. Hey, you know who else said that exact same word to me? Right here in this truck?" Hammond didn't have to tell me. I suddenly knew for certain what had happened to Bill Barvey. Then Hammond snatched the rifle from my lap and hit the brakes. The truck skidded to a stop. Up ahead was what at first I thought was the side of a dam, cutting a big swath out of the lower half of the night sky. It took a second before I realized we were looking up at a long artificial hillside that was built to support a stretch of highway that ran along its top. Way up and too far away for anyone to hear me scream, headlights of cars and trucks passed blithely by. At the foot of the hillside was a man-made pond about the size of a football field. It was the type of impoundment pond found along any highway in this nation, bulldozed out of the earth to catch and collect runoff from the roadway. "Get on out," Hammond said, leveling the rifle at me again. Slowly, shaking, I climbed out. I asked Hammond why he was doing this. Pointless, I know, but it's something anyone would ask out loud in this sort of situation. Hammond, of course, just mocked me for asking and told me to keep walking if I didn't want him to shoot me in the stomach and drag me. I walked. I went in the direction Hammond indicated with the end of the gun barrel. At first, I heard and felt gravel crunching under my shoes. Then I felt hard, cold concrete. There was a pier of sorts that jutted several feet out into the edge of the pond. It must have housed an outlet or a drain, I'm not sure. Hammond marched me out to the end of it. The pond was V-shaped. The two edges adjacent to the pier were basically sheer walls. The far edge was a shouldered bank covered in shrubs that dipped down to the water. "Take off your shoes," Hammond said to me, "or you'll sink too fast." "What?" is all I could stammer in response. "Take 'em off," Hammond growled, jabbing the gun barrel at me. I took off my shoes. "Take off your pants," Hammond said. I complied. This continued until all I had on were my boxers and my socks. "Jump on in," Hammond said. I was completely numb at this point, not from the chill of the night. I knew I was almost certainly about to be murdered. All I was trying to do was stay alive for as many more moments as I could. I jumped off the pier and into the freezing cold water. Coming up for air and sputtering, I half expected to hear the rifle go off, and that would be the end. But I looked up, and there was Hammond, standing over me at the end of the pier, feet wide, cradling the rifle. "Swim out a couple feet," he said. "Don't worry, I'm not going to shoot you yet." I did a lopsided backstroke and moved out closer to the center of the pond. There was a click, and then there was a round pool of light on the water in front of me, between me and the pier. It hadn't been a scope mounted onto Hammond's rifle. It was some kind of spotlight. He shined it right in my face. Then he swept it out over the high, straight sides of the pond that radiated out from the pier. In the illumination of the spotlight, I could see that when this impoundment pond was put in, those two sides were built out of featureless slabs of concrete. There was no climbing out of the thing unless I somehow was able to swim to the far bank. "There's nothing below your toes but 18 feet of water," Hammond said, "and below that 4 or 5 feet of extra fine silt." "Hammond," I begged, "come on, please." "You're going to sink like a stone, and then you're going to disappear down into that silt," Hammond said back to me. "Nobody will ever find you." "Hammond, don't do this," I said. "You can try diving and swimming away under the water," Hammond said, "but it ain't like in the movies. These bullets will cut right through the water and find you." I begged Hammond to please think about my family. "I filed down the tips of the bullets nice and flat. That way, when they go through the water," Hammond was saying. But a pair of headlights appeared through the trees over to his right. He turned towards them, swinging the gun barrel carelessly as he did so. "Hold on a sec," Hammond said to me over his shoulder, like we were just two old chums interrupted while working on a car. I could not tell if the headlights were approaching us on the same road Hammond had driven us down, or if it was only passing by. But the sight of the back of Hammond's head was all it took to break the spell. I gulped a lungful of air and dove below the water. With every last desperate ounce of strength I could muster, I did an underwater breaststroke towards the far shore. A second later, out of the corner of my eye, I saw the pool of light come back on and sweep across the top of the pond, searching for me. The water barely muffled the sound of the rifle. A long, straight streak of bubbles suddenly appeared inches from my head as the bullet tore past me. I changed directions and tried to go deeper. A terrible pain in my ears and a huge amount of pressure in my chest kept me from doing so. The rifle went off again. I did not see where that bullet went, but I was sure it must have been close to my flailing legs. I let out a giant bubble of air, probably half of what was stored in my lungs. This allowed me to dive a little deeper and keep going for a few more strokes. I heard the muffled sound of another shot and saw a column of bubbles flick into existence a few feet away from me, but I was nearing the end of my endurance and I had to come up for air. My head popped above the water just long enough for me to take a second breath. I heard a maniacal screech come from the pier, and I heard the rifle go off again. I forced myself back below the water and continued swimming towards the other bank. I had to go up for air a second time. The pier was behind me when I did so. I expected to take a bullet to the back of the head at any moment, but had ceased caring. If Hammond was going to kill me, there was nothing I could do about it. But I did not see the glow from the searchlight and did not hear the gun go off. The bank, covered in shrubs, was now a lot nearer to me. I sank back down into the murky water and kept going. The thought hit me that Hammond must have abandoned the pier and was circling the pond to find me. My chest and chin hit soft, wet, loamy mud, and I realized that I had made it to the shallow part of the pond where it met the bank. There was still air in my lungs, so I reached up out of the water with just one hand. My fingers clawed and grasped desperately for purchase, finally seizing upon the trunk of a low, stubborn bush. I pulled with everything I had left in me to get the rest of the way out of that pond. I lay under the cover of the shrubs and listened for Hammond. I thought I could hear someone thrashing around in the undergrowth, but it was only part of the way around the pond from where I lay, so I crawled forward, slowly and as quietly as I felt I could. I was freezing cold and getting covered in dirt and leaves. The branches of the undergrowth tore and scratched my bare, wet skin. After about 20 feet, the shrubbery began to thin out. I stopped and listened. There was the sound of passing traffic on the roadway high above me. There was the sound of the evening wind in the tree branches overhead. There was what could have been the sound of someone scuttling around the woodland, but that was still considerably distant from where I was hiding. I got up in a low crouch and moved cautiously into the trees. Hammond reached out of the darkness and grabbed my shoulders. I screamed and tried to grapple with him, but he was far too strong. He stood me up like a rag doll and shoved me against a tree. The bark gouged the skin on my back. I tried to scream again, and he slapped a giant hand over my mouth, shoving my head back so hard it slammed against the tree. "Help me!" Hammond hissed into my face. I stared at Hammond over the edge of his hand. My fingers were digging into the shirt over the front of his chest. I guess I was still trying to fend him off. "Buddy, you gotta help me," he hissed into my face again. Hammond relaxed the grip over my mouth. "You were trying to kill me," I hissed back. For some reason, I also was not yelling. No, buddy, you're getting it all wrong," Hammond whispered. There was terror in his eyes. "No, man, I wasn't trying to kill anybody." "You had a gun," I hissed back. He shoved his hand over my mouth again. No, man, I wasn't going to kill you," Hammond said into my face. "I was just funning you. We were just—" Someone stepped on a branch. Hammond froze like a statue. I could hear his eyes moving in their sockets as he looked out of their corners at something off to my left. "Okay," Hammond whispered to me. He licked his lips and then said, "Here's what we're going to do." Suddenly, and with vicious strength, Hammond seized both my arms and flung me around. I half flew, half stumbled for several feet until my head struck another tree in the dark. When I woke, I was staring up at the moonlit tree limbs and the stars above them. I could hear Hammond's voice. He was pleading with someone. He was trying to make a deal. Slowly, I rolled onto my stomach and looked up. Hammond was on his knees in the pine needles. His hands were up in a defensive posture. They were shaking. There was a tall, dark figure of a man standing over him. Whoever the guy was, he was holding Hammond's rifle. Hammond was begging the guy not to shoot him. "I'll just walk away," Hammond was telling the dark figure. "I'll just walk away and none of this ever happened. Won't say a thing?" The gun barrel came up slowly. "Please don't kill me," Hammond cried. The man holding the rifle never said anything back to Hammond. He simply shrugged. That single motion of those high, wide shoulders was the most utter expression of callousness I have ever seen, as indifferent to any human's plight as the infinite cosmos. The rifle whipped up, catching Hammond at a sharp angle under his jaw. Then the man shot him. I just barely managed to stifle a scream. I shoved my face into the dirt and leaves and pine needles. I clawed at the ground as if gravity were about to invert itself and I had to keep from tumbling up into the abyss above me. My whole body shrank like a mouse, cringing, in a hawk's shadow. I made no sound. The man was doing something with Hammond's body, moving it around somehow, for some reason. Then I heard him turn and take a step towards me. Then another. Then I heard him unzip his pants, and that was followed by the sound of urine hitting the leaves not too far from where I lay. I kept completely still while this happened. The stranger zipped himself up and then turned and walked away through the trees. I continued to lay there. I was shivering, and I'm sure I was becoming hypothermic. but I did not dare move for quite a while. Eventually, I unmoored myself from the spot where I had been cringing. In the moonlight, I could tell that I was almost completely coated with dirt and detritus from the forest floor. I could also see that Hammond had been propped up against a pine tree. The gun had been left leaning against him, the barrel pointing up at the remains of his head. One of his hands had been placed upon the stock. The thumb of the other hand had been carefully looped over the trigger. My terror-stricken brain was convinced the killer still lurked nearby. I crouched down and lay in a fetal position. I shivered until the sun came up. At sunrise, I found myself very much alive. Despite the fact that a shattered corpse lay only a few paces away from me, the artificial dale where the pond sat had taken on a peaceful, primordial aspect in the morning light. I neither saw nor heard another soul anywhere near me. It took a while, but I picked my way through the trees around the pond to where Hammond's truck still stood parked. I found my cast-off shoes, trousers, and shirt from among the reeds at the base of the pier. I pulled them on over the filth that still caked my skin. I turned to the gravel road and started walking back to town. I have never contacted the police about Hammond's death. There would have been too many questions. They might have thought I had something to do with it. At the very least, they would have figured out why I was in the truck. If any mention of drugs made it back to my union, I could be barred. I never even saw the face of Hammond's killer under the shadow of those trees. I have every reason to keep quiet on the matter and no reason to speak up. So, I have kept quiet.
Knox came by. That whole area was purchased in 2004. It's a persimmon orchard now. Apparently, when the police recovered Hammond's body, his driver's license had some other name. So that explains it. I'd be angry. But I'm on a lot of painkillers. I should call my brother.